In 1521, the Spanish galleon San Miguel, sailing from Seville to the shores of the New World, disappeared in the waters near the Canary Islands. Of the 123 crew members, only 19 reached the port of Santa Cruz, Delaware, Tenerife, and even then in a rowboat rather than on their own ship. The ship was found 2 weeks later drifting out of control 50 miles from its last port of call with torn sails, broken railings, and strange scratches on the wooden hull below the waterline. No cargo or bodies were found in the hold. Only knee-deep seawater and a smell of rot that did not go away even after the ship was towed to port. The captain of the galleon reported the incident to the royal governor, but the report was immediately seized by the church authorities and placed in the archives under the label secretum. Secret. The document stayed there for 400 years until a French historian working on a study of Spanish sea expeditions of the 16th century discovered it by chance in 1923 among papers being prepared for destruction after a fire in Seville Cathedral. What was described in Captain Don Rodrigo de Ayala's report did not fit into any understanding of the dangers of the sea at that time. Neither pirates, nor storms, nor reefs. The church decided to hide the information, fearing that such stories would damage the authority of sea expeditions to the New World on which the wealth of the Spanish crown depended. Modern researchers have long debated whether the document was real. The description of the attacking creatures seemed too fantastic, but analysis of the ink, paper, and handwriting confirmed that the report was indeed written in the first half of the 16th century, and the captain's signature matched samples from other documents of that period. Moreover, references to similar incidents in the same waters were found in the archives of Lisbon and Amsterdam, a Portuguese caravel in 1514, and a Dutch merchant ship in 1538. All descriptions contained common elements. The attack took place at night in calm waters. The attackers appeared from the depths and disappeared as suddenly as they had appeared. The galleon San Miguel left Seville on April 23, 1521, carrying a cargo of wine, olive oil, iron tools, and fabrics meant for the colonies in New Spain. The crew consisted of experienced sailors, many of whom had crossed the Atlantic more than once. Captain Don Rodrigo de Ayala was a 52-year-old veteran of sea voyages who had participated in expeditions since the time of Columbus. His first mate, a Basque named Juan, had been sailing for 20 years and knew the waters around the Canary Islands like the back of his hand. Also on board were 3 Franciscan monks on their way to a mission in the New World and 2 cartographers from the University of Salamanca, whose task was to create more accurate maps of Atlantic routes. The first 2 weeks of sailing passed without incident. The weather was good, a light tailwind, calm seas, clear skies. The galleon sailed at a speed of about 6 knots, following the standard route along the African coast to the Canary Islands, where a stop was planned to get fresh water and supplies. On May 7th, the ship dropped anchor in a small bay on the island of La Gomera, one of the less populated islands of the group. The locals, Spanish colonists, and several families of Guanches, the native people of the islands, welcomed the sailors warmly, offering them fresh fruit, goat meat, and water from mountain springs. The captain planned to stay at anchor for 3 days, give the crew a chance to rest on shore, repair the rigging, and tar several boards in the hull that had begun to leak. But on the very first evening, a strange incident occurred. One of the sailors, a young Andalusian named Pedro, went out in a rowboat to check the fishing nets set at the entrance to the bay. He returned an hour later, pale and shaking, speaking unclearly about seeing a woman in the water. She was swimming 10 feet from the boat, looking at him and smiling. Her hair was long, black, and loose, falling to her shoulders. Her skin was pale, almost white in the moonlight. Pedro called out to her, asking if she needed help, thinking someone had fallen off the shore. The woman didn't answer, just kept looking and smiling. Then she dove underwater, and Pedro saw that instead of legs, she had a tail, long and covered with scales like a big fish. The sailors laughed at him. Mermaids, sirens, fairy tales for children and drunks. Pedro swore he hadn't had a drop to drink, that he had seen everything with his own eyes in the clear moonlight. First Mate Juan put an end to the gossip with a sharp shout. ordering Pedro to go to bed and stop spreading superstitious tales that made the crew nervous. Captain de Ayala recorded the incident in the ship's log as an unusual case, suggesting that the sailor had mistaken a seal or dolphin for a woman. They were often seen in those waters. But the next night, 2 sailors disappeared. Both were on evening watch patrolling the deck. Their shift was supposed to end at midnight, but when the time came, they were nowhere to be found. The entire ship was searched, the hold's cabins, galley. A boat was lowered, and the water around the galleon was searched with torches. No traces. It was as if 2 grown men had vanished in a thin air. Only wet footprints were found on the deck, bare footprints too small for men's feet, more likely women's, with unusually long toes. The footprints led from the side of the ship to the center of the deck and back to the side where they ended at the railing. The captain ordered double watch and that no one should approach the ship alone. The local elder, an elderly Spaniard who had lived on the island for 30 years, listened to the description of the incident, shook his head, and said that the captain should have chosen another bay. This bay had a bad reputation among the locals. The Guanches called it a Naga in Mara, the bay of what comes from the sea. Their ancestors did not fish here, did not swim, did not even take water from the stream flowing into the bay. They said that creatures lived in the depths, luring men with songs and dragging them to the bottom. The elder added that during his lifetime on the island, 7 local residents who had ignored the warnings had disappeared. 2 fishermen, 3 sailors from merchant ships, a priest who had decided to go swimming, and a child who had been playing on the shore. The bodies were never found. Captain Ayala was an educated man, not prone to superstition, but not so overconfident as to ignore local knowledge. He ordered to weigh anchor at dawn, without waiting for the repairs to be completed. The night was tense. 6 men stood watch instead of the usual 2, all armed with crossbows and muskets. The captain himself did not sleep, standing on the quarterdeck, peering into the dark water around the ship. The moon was almost full. The sea was calm as a mirror, and there was no wind at all. It was too quiet for a normal night. Even the seagulls weren't crying, and the fish weren't splashing. There was a dead silence broken only by the creaking of the ship's rigging and the occasional splashes against the hull, which could have been waves from the current or something else. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, one of the watchmen shouted that he could see lights in the water. The captain ran to the side of the ship and indeed saw a greenish glow flickering in the depths about 20 feet below the surface. It was not continuous, but rather scattered, like a scattering of small lights moving in a circle around the ship. The lights rose closer to the surface, and shapes became visible in their light. Figures swimming around the galleon. Many figures, dozens, maybe hundreds. They moved gracefully in waves, using their tails to push themselves forward, their hands clinging to the underwater parts of the ship's hull. One of the monks, Brother Antonio, an elderly man who had spent many years in Africa, began an exorcism prayer, calling on the saints to drive out the sea demons. His voice trembled, but his words sounded firm in Latin with the correct pronunciation. The creatures in the water reacted. The glow became brighter, their movements faster. One of them rose to the surface, poked its head out of the water, and looked at the ship. In the moonlight, the captain could make out a face. Human, female, with delicate features, large eyes with no visible whites, only dark pupils against a silver iris. The skin was pale, with a greenish tint covered with small scales shining like pearls. The hair was long, dark, floating around the head like seaweed. But the mouth was wrong, too wide, opening further than a human's. And the teeth inside were sharp, triangular, arranged in 2 rows like a shark's. The creature made a sound, high-pitched, melodic, almost like singing, but with harsh notes that pierced the ears. Other creatures in the water picked up the sound, and a chorus rose around the ship. Hundreds of voices merging into a mix that was both beautiful and terrifying. The sailors covered their ears with their hands, some shouting for the singing to stop. The monk continued his prayer louder, drowning out the sounds, but his voice trembled more and more, and his words began to get mixed up. Then the creatures attacked. The first 3 figures to climb aboard came from the starboard side. They emerged from the water in one swift motion, grabbed the railing with their hands and swung themselves onto the deck with a speed that no human could match. On deck, they moved awkwardly, leaning on their hands and pushing off with their tails. But their speed was impressive. One creature lunged at the nearest sailor, sinking its teeth into his shoulder, tearing through his clothes and skin in a second. The sailor screamed and tried to push the attacker away, but the creature held on with a death grip, tearing off pieces of flesh and swallowing them with wild hunger. Another sailor fired his musket at point-blank range. The bullet hit the creature in the chest, piercing it through. A dark liquid spurted out, not red like blood, but greenish-black with a sharp smell of iodine and rot. The creature pulled back, hissed, but did not fall. The wound closed before their eyes. The edges came together. The flesh grew back together. And after a few seconds, only a dark scar remained. The creature rushed back into the attack, now aiming for the shooter's throat. More and more creatures climbed onto the deck. They came from all sides, over the railings, over the anchor chains, even through the windows of the rear cabins. The sailors fought back with whatever they could. Swords, axes, boat hooks, clubs. Iron cut through the creature's flesh easily, but their wounds healed too quickly to kill them. Only cutting off their heads or splitting them in half stopped the attackers. But there were many of them. Too many. For every creature killed, 3 new ones climbed aboard. Captain Ayala ordered tar barrels to be lit and thrown onto the deck. The fire spread quickly, covering the wooden deck and sails, but it stopped the attack. The creatures avoided the flames, hissing and retreating from the burning areas. Taking advantage of the confusion, the surviving sailors, now fewer than 30 out of 123, lowered a boat from the port side, which was still free of attackers. The captain, first mate, and 2 monks covered the retreat, fighting off the creatures trying to break through the wall of fire. The 3rd monk, the youngest, Brother Diego, slipped on the blood-soaked deck and fell. 2 creatures instantly jumped on him, biting into his stomach and legs. His screams were short. His throat was torn open almost immediately. The captain tried to help, striking one creature on the head with his sword, splitting its skull, but the second was already dragging the monk's body toward the rail. Other creatures helped, grabbing the corpse and dragging it overboard into the water, where it was instantly surrounded by a group, tearing its flesh to pieces. 19 people got into the boat and began rowing away from the burning galleon. Behind them was hell. The ship was on fire, the flames rising dozens of feet into the air, lighting up the area as if it were daytime. Figures rushed about the deck. Creatures seized by panic from the fire jumped into the water, while those sailors who had not managed to escape fought to the last or burned alive. The screams mixed with the hissing of creatures and the crackling of burning wood. The smell of burnt flesh, smoke, and the greenish-black liquid that was the blood of sea creatures drifted through the night air. They rowed all night without stopping until they saw the island shore. At dawn, they landed on a rocky beach 2 miles from the bay where the galleon was anchored. The men were exhausted, many wounded, bites, cuts, burns. 2 had died from blood loss in the boat, and their bodies were left on the shore, covered with cloaks. The remaining 17 reached the settlement by noon, moving along animal trails through the thick brush. The locals greeted them with horror, wounded men in torn and burnt clothes, with wild eyes, mumbling about sea demons. The mayor ordered them to be placed in the church, given water and food, and a doctor to be called. Captain Ayala, despite a wound on his arm and burns on his face, immediately demanded paper and ink. He wrote a report to the royal governor describing everything that had happened without leaving out a single detail, no matter how unbelievable it seemed. The report was sent by courier to Tenerife that same day. 2 weeks later, a group of soldiers arrived from Tenerife along with a group of priests led by the bishop. They listened to the survivors' accounts. All 17 men described the events in almost identical detail with only minor differences, which confirmed the truth of their testimony. The bishop ordered an expedition to the crash site. They found the galleon drifting without control. The hull was burned, the sails were completely destroyed, and the deck was covered with ashes and strange stains of a greenish-black substance. The bodies of the sailors were not found, neither in the holds, nor in the cabins, nor on the deck. Only scraps of clothing, blood stains, and traces of a struggle. Sword marks on the masts, broken barrels, and smashed railings. But the main discovery was made in the front hold. There they found the body of one of the creatures stuck between the beams. Apparently, it had been hiding from the fire and was unable to escape when the fire ended. The body was already decomposing and gave off an unbearable smell, but its structure could still be seen. The length from head to tail tip was about 7 feet. The upper part, the torso, arms, and head, was almost human, but with differences. The skin was covered with small scales. The fingers were longer than usual with webs between them. The face was twisted by a death mask. The mouth was open, showing a double row of sharp teeth. Was a powerful tail with fins covered with large scales like those of a large tuna or shark. The bishop ordered the body to be burned immediately without even allowing it to be sketched. The ashes were scattered over the sea with prayers. The galleon was towed to port and sold for scrap, and the wood was used to build houses, but only after each plank had been blessed. The surviving sailors were paid compensation and made to swear an oath of silence. Captain de Ayala received a new assignment, command of a land caravan to New Spain, far from the sea. He agreed without objection, telling the bishop that he never wanted to see the ocean again for the rest of his life. The captain's report was taken and placed in a secret archive, along with the testimonies of the other survivors. The bishop wrote a detailed report to Rome describing the incident and asking for instructions on how to proceed in such cases. The reply arrived 4 months later, bearing the seal of the Holy Inquisition. The main point of it was as follows. Such creatures have been known to the Church since ancient times and are mentioned in forbidden texts as demons of the water element or the offspring of fallen angels who mixed with sea creatures before the flood. They avoid holy water and fear fire, but have physical strength greater than that of humans and the ability to heal themselves. It is useless to try to kill them all. They are too numerous and live in depths humans cannot reach. The only strategy is to avoid their habitats and keep silent about their existence, so as not to cause panic among sailors. The Church also recommended changing sea routes to avoid particularly dangerous areas. Secret maps were drawn up marking the locations where ships had been attacked or disappeared under strange circumstances. These maps were given only to captains of the royal fleet and captains of merchant ships who had special permission. Ordinary sailors were told that the route changes were necessary to avoid reefs or dangerous currents. But information leaked out. Sailors are a superstitious and talkative group. Stories about sea women attacking ships spread from port to port, becoming filled with details and exaggerations. By the middle of the 16th century, almost every sailor on the Atlantic knew about mermaids, sirens, and sea witches. The names varied depending on the region, but the essence remained the same. Beautiful women with fish tails, luring sailors with songs and dragging them to the bottom. Only those who had encountered them personally knew the truth. They were not the beautiful creatures of legend, but predators, dangerous and ruthless, hunting humans for food. The attacks continued in the following centuries. The archives of the British Admiralty contain reports from captains describing similar incidents. In 1637, the ship Sea Star lost half its crew off the coast of Madeira after a night attack by creatures matching the description of sea people. In 1723, a French military corvette opened fire on a group of these creatures that surrounded the ship in the waters near the Azores. Several were killed by grape shot, and the captain ordered their bodies to be brought on board and preserved in barrels of salt as evidence. But when the corvette returned to Brest, the barrels were empty. The bodies had disappeared, although the seals on the barrels remained intact. The scientific community of the 18th and 19th centuries was skeptical about such reports. Naturalists explained encounters with mermaids as misidentifications of seals, dugongs, or manatees, marine mammals that in certain lighting and at a distance could resemble human figures. Attacks on ships were blamed on pirates, mutinies, or natural disasters which sailors, due to their superstition, interpreted as attacks by mythical creatures. But there are also those who study the issue seriously. In 1842, French marine biologist Pierre Denis published a work entitled On Unknown Species of Marine Fauna, in which he collected evidence from sailors from different countries and eras. He noted consistent patterns. Attacks occurred mainly in warm waters near islands with deep underwater caves. At night, when the sea was calm, the creatures avoided large warships, preferring to attack merchant ships and fishing boats. They showed signs of social behavior, hunting in groups, coordinating their actions, and retreating when faced with significant resistance. Denis suggested that this was a real biological species, possibly a branch of evolution that had separated from the common ancestor of humans and adapted to an aquatic environment. His theory was met with ridicule in academic circles. Denis's career suffered and funding for his research was cut off. He died in poverty in 1859 and his archives were lost in a fire. The 20th century brought new technologies and new opportunities for ocean exploration. Submarines, deep-sea vehicles, sonar, underwater cameras. All of this was supposed to clear up myths and reveal the true picture of marine life. And indeed, no mermaids were found. The ocean turned out to be full of amazing creatures. Giant squids, deep-sea fish with glowing bodies, strange worms near hot springs, but nothing resembling a half-human, half-fish creature. However, the classified archives of the navies of several countries contain documents that give reason to pause. In 1943, an American submarine patrolling the waters near the Canary Islands detected a group of large objects moving at speeds and with coordination impossible for fish. The objects surrounded the submarine and struck its hull several times with such force that they damaged the external sensors. The commander decided to surface immediately. When the submarine rose to periscope depth, the periscope operator saw a face looking at him through the glass for a second. A human face, female, with large eyes without whites. Then the face disappeared into the foam of the waves. In 1976, a Soviet oceanographic expedition in the Canary Islands dropped a deep-sea camera to a depth of 300 meters to explore underwater caves. The camera recorded several minutes of video showing moving figures, approximately human-sized, but with tails swimming in the depths of the cave. The quality of the recording is poor. The lighting is insufficient, and it is impossible to identify the creatures with certainty. However, experts who analyzed the film noted that the movement of the figures does not match known marine animals. It is too purposeful, too coordinated. In 2007, Spanish fishermen near the island of Lanzarote pulled something strange out of their nets. A body about 2 meters long, badly decomposed, but still keeping its overall structure. The upper part resembled a human torso with arms, while the lower part resembled a fishtail. The fishermen photographed their find on a cell phone and reported it to the local police. When the authorities arrived, the body had already disappeared. The fishermen claimed that they returned an hour later with the police, but the nets were empty, as if someone had cut out the body and taken it away. The photographs were preserved, but experts declared them to be fake. Modern science still does not accept the existence of mermaids. The arguments are convincing. The absence of skeletons or other physical remains, the impossibility of such a hybrid evolving within the framework of known biology, and the lack of an ecological niche for such a species. All evidence can be explained by errors in perception, hoaxes, or misidentification of known animals. But sailors, especially those who sail in the waters of the Canary Islands, the Azores, and the Caribbean, know the truth. They don't tell journalists or scientists about it. They simply avoid certain areas, especially at night. They don't drop anchor in isolated bays. They don't sail alone. They do not respond to the singing coming from the darkness above the water. And if they see a woman in the sea asking for help, they pass by without stopping because they know that it is not a woman. It is a lure, and in the water below her swims a group, waiting for a fool to lower a boat. Old fishermen in the Canary Islands still tell the story of the Spanish galleon. They show tourists the bay on the island of La Gomera, which the locals call cursed. They say that sometimes on quiet moonlit nights, singing can be heard from the depths. Beautiful, melodic, tempting, and those who hear this singing feel an uncontrollable urge to enter the water and swim toward the source of the sound. Some cannot resist. In the morning, their clothes are found on the shore, neatly folded as if the person had undressed to go swimming. But the person themselves is never found. The church built a stone cross on the shore of that bay in 1524, 3 years after the incident with the galleon San Miguel. The cross bears an inscription in Latin, which translates as, "Here the sea keeps its dead. Do not disturb their sleep." The cross still stands covered with moss and lichen, but the locals regularly renew the inscription so that the words remain readable. And every year on May 7th, the anniversary of the first night of that doomed anchorage, a priest from the local church comes to the cross and holds a memorial mass for the souls of the 104 sailors who never returned home. And deep down in underwater caves where the water is cold and dark even at midday, where hot springs warm the stone caves and currents bring fish from the open ocean, they live, a colony, perhaps one of many scattered across the warm seas of the planet. They hunt, reproduce, and raise their young in the safety of the depths. They rarely come to the surface, only when they are hungry and confident of their prey. They avoid large ships with powerful engines and bright lights. They remember that fire is dangerous, that iron cuts, that humans can fight back. But they also remember that humans are food, soft, slow in water, easily torn apart by sharp teeth. And while ships sail the seas, while fishermen go out into the ocean in small boats, while tourists swim in secluded bays on warm islands, they will wait deep down in the darkness, listening to the sounds from the surface, the splash of oars, the laughter of people, the music from shore. And sometimes when conditions are perfect, warm water, a quiet night, a full moon, isolated prey, they will rise quietly without splashes using currents and shadows. They approach the boat or the swimmer, and they sing because singing works. It always has. Something in these sounds affects the human brain, freezes the will, attracts, makes you forget about danger. And when the victim is close enough, when she reaches out to the singer, enchanted by the beauty of her voice and face in the moonlight, then a mouth full of sharp teeth opens, and the singing turns into a scream, a short scream, quickly drowned out by water pouring into the throat. Captain Don Rodrigo de Ayala lived for another 23 years after that night. He commanded caravans in New Spain, rose to high rank, and retired with honors. But for the rest of his life, he could not sleep in rooms where he could hear the sea. He could not hear women singing even in church. He woke up at night in a cold sweat, seeing faces with large eyes without whites, faces smiling too widely, opening mouths full of teeth. Before his death, in a feverish delirium, he cried out that they had come for him, that he could hear their singing, that the water was rising. The priest, who was present at his death, recorded the captain's last words, spoken with complete clarity of mind. Do not swim toward the singers. Do not believe the beautiful faces in the waves. The sea lies. The sea is hungry. The sea remembers the taste of human flesh. These words were carved on his tombstone in Seville. But 50 years later, the church ordered them to be erased and replaced with a conventional message. These words were too disturbing, too honest, and the truth about what lives in the depths of warm seas was a secret that the church had kept for centuries. It still keeps it, because the world is not ready to learn that legends about mermaids are not just fairy tales, that beneath the waves, in the caves and cracks of the continental shelf, there live creatures that were once perhaps human or descended from a common ancestor with us, but chose a different path of evolution, the path of a predator. And this path led them to places where humans are powerless, to depths where light cannot reach, where pressure would crush any diver, where the cold would kill even in a wetsuit in a matter of minutes. That they're safe, that they're masters, and from there, sometimes on quiet moonlit nights, they rise to the surface. Not often, not predictably, but regularly enough that the stories live on. So that old sailors warn the young. So that fishermen steer clear of certain places. So that those who know remember. The ocean does not forgive mistakes, and the biggest mistake is to think you are alone in it.